what we found out is that in Ukraine, almost anyone knows how to pilot a drone, and not only
Mm.
pilot it, but understand the tactics that comes with UAV warfare. Now, in the West, unfortunately, situation is different, and ultimately we are also trying to be that bridge between Ukraine and Western allies, where we would export Ukrainian know-how and sort of way of fighting into the West. And this is, as you rightfully mentioned, this is where our service component comes into play, and we're
Yeah.
trying to educate foreign armed forces how to fight modern warfare.
Ivan, it's John Pina. Welcome to the program. Really appreciate your making time to talk to me. Can I just start by just asking you about you? You were, tell me, you were a business entrepreneur until the invasion came, and that changed your plans and it changed your life.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you. Thank you for having me, John. Yes, so I started out my career in a corporate setting and was a finance executive at IBM across different former CIS countries. I worked in Ukraine, Russia, Kazakhstan, and during my time at IBM, I was covering also other countries of former Soviet Union. Then shortly, maybe like 2 years before the war, I left my corporate job to start my own company and was working on that very actively, raising funds, setting up the business. And just when I was about to launch my company, it was a real estate development company, and we were about to break ground on our first project. The war started, and I had to join an army then.
Right. So that is a very drastic change of direction in your life, and many in Ukraine would have experienced that sort of extraordinary turnaround in their lives. So you went from real estate development eventually to your important work in the defense sector of Ukraine. But in the meantime, of course, you after the invasion, you found yourself in uniform. You were in the military. Can you tell me a bit about your military experience, your battlefield and combat experience in particular?
Sure. Well, I think maybe one week, nobody knew if invasion would happen or not. There were different conflicting messages from, I guess, our intelligence community and Western intelligence community, which was more uh, sort of looking back at it, Western intelligence community was more spot on when and how things are going to unfold. But I think one week or maybe like 3, 4 days before the invasion, there was this sense that inevitably something will happen. And at a time, I lived in Kiev with my family, with my wife and 2 kids. So what we decided to do is 2 days before the invasion happened, and obviously we did not know when and if it would happen at all. I took my wife and kids and brought them to Western Ukraine, closer to the border with Europe. And when the war started, I drove them to the border and sent them over to Poland to our friends. So I was left alone in Ukraine at that point, without wife and kids. And I joined an army, I believe, I tried to join an army on 1st of March of 2022. So it was second week of the invasion. Now, it was pretty chaotic back then, and a recruitment officer just got my number and told me that, they don't need volunteers at the moment, that sort of all positions are filled or whatnot. But then 2 weeks later, I got a call from recruitment officer and asked me to come and sign papers and everything. So this is how I joined armed forces. My first months, I was stationed locally in Western Ukraine in one of the reserve companies. We were supposed to get training, I believe, back then, but again, because everything was so chaotic and there were no instructors, so
Hmm.
we were pretty much left on our own. And luckily, we've had many veterans from Ukrainian veterans that were fighting since 2014. that trained us, and also my good friend, who's a U.S. guy, former Marine. He volunteered and came from U.S. to Ukraine to train my company when we were in that reserve company. So 1 month forward from that reserve company, I was assigned to 10th Mountain Assault Brigade, which was and still is one of the sort of most battle-hardened assault units in Ukrainian army, and was spent 2 weeks in training at their base in Western Ukraine, and then was sent straight to Bakhmut, not to the city itself, because back then it was summer of 2022. The fights were going on sort of in the vicinity of the city. And that's sort of where I spent pretty much all of my combat time in Bakhmut defensive campaign. It was Bakhmut, Solidar, and that entire agglomeration. Um,
Right. So you fought, Ivan, on the front line with your units, and you saw combat. You saw a good deal of combat, and you were twice wounded, injured in action. Can you just tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, I was in the infantry, right? I was a rifleman. Unfortunately, I did not have, or maybe fortunately, I don't know. I did not have any military training prior to joining an army, because in Ukraine, actually, army service is mandatory. um, Even before the war, everybody has to go and serve in the army. And some of the guys that sort of graduate from that service, they end up being sergeants, or some of them even officers if they sort of decide to um, spend more time than the mandatory 1 year. I was recruited as a simple infantryman, so I was right at the line of contact, seeing all the action and participating very actively. Now, the average lifespan of a rifleman infantry in Ukraine, in particular on the main offensive effort of an enemy, which
Yeah.
was Bakhmut at a time, is not very long, frankly. And luckily, I was at the line of contact for 7 months. And it does not mean that I was sort of there repelling assaults like every single day, because usually it works like this. You go for 2 weeks on combat positions, spend
Yes.
there 2 weeks, then go back for a week, take a rest, and then again and again. And sometimes it's just 3 days. Sometimes you go for 2 weeks and get yourself water and food just for 2 weeks, and it ends up being months and a half. So yeah, there were different sort of amount of time that I would spend at the line of contact every time, but every single time we would go in, we were shelled with artillery very heavily, not as much with drones back then, because it was 2022, 2023. There were occasional recon drones, um, mostly for recon purposes and also guiding the artillery.
Mm.
Not as many sort of droppers or bombers or FPV drones, but heavy artillery shelling and a lot of aviation on Bakhmut direction, and also lots of gun action too, which is less common now, but there are more drones now. So
So constant danger in the front line, occasional respite as you step back from the front line. But you were twice a victim of concussion.
right. Yeah, so the first concussion that I got was, pretty mild. I just spent a week at it was called company's medical point. It's basically just two medical professionals, and it's 5 kilometers away from the front line. So I would just spend a week there, just recovering, but it was nothing sort of nothing too crazy. But
That was shock from a shell, shock from an explosion.
that's right. That's right. It's similar, and also my left eardrum got fractured because of that because of that shock. It sort of similar to being punched in the head really
Yes.
strongly.
Okay, Ivan, you've seen your share of action. Tell me how that experience there on the front line influenced, maybe inspired the work that you have ended up doing in making the arms industry of Ukraine more effective and more efficient. Tell me, how did that happen? Your experience turning into the work you're doing.
Well, I was actually at the hospital recovering from my third concussion. I actually got three concussions, so that was my third one and sort of the most severe one. And when you're at the hospital, especially for a prolonged period of time, I think I spent a month there overall. You don't have much to do, so we're just, playing on my phone, reading books and stuff like that. And I reached out to a British gentleman. His name is Brooks Newmark. He's a former minister and a senior
Mm.
banker at a
I
poll.
remember him. Yeah.
Um, apologies. Um,
No,
uh,
please carry on.
yeah. So I reached out to Mr. Newmark, and we started talking about Ukraine and about current state of conflict. And Brooks was doing a lot of humanitarian work back then, and still doing it now. He helped evacuate more than 35,000 refugees from the combat zone to safety. So our conversation started around his humanitarian work and what we can do together. And because we have fairly similar backgrounds in business, our conversation started to gravitate more towards business side of things. And we started with thinking about maybe setting up a venture capital firm investing in Ukrainian defense tech companies.
Yeah.
But after much research, we found out that capital, don't get me wrong, it's a big problem for Ukrainian defense tech, and Ukrainian companies desperately need capital. But even more than capital, and one of the enablers of getting more money into Ukrainian ecosystem of defense tech companies, I think, is actual sort of know-how how to build a company by Western standards that would be
Mm.
attractive to Western investors. And this is where Brooks came in, and we thought, listen, instead of trying to invest into these companies that are great companies, don't get me wrong, but maybe we should roll up our sleeves and try to do something ourselves and help not with just money and advice, but actually putting in work additionally to money. And that's how Trypillian has started. And this
Yeah.
is what we've been doing ever since.
You're a business service company in the defense field, helping companies do business effectively and efficiently in a way that makes them just more productive and makes the business tick over better. You're also into research. It's interesting because Ukraine is in the front line of weapons research, in particular, making a little money go a very long way, making the most of the little by way of financial resources that you have, so that you're setting an example in that way to much more long established military powers.
Yes, well, so research and sort of service side of things is not the only thing that we do. It's one of the things. We also do develop hardware and software.
Yeah.
So we do develop our own set of drones, and we're about to announce our first family of tactical UAVs next week, I hope. But service component is a big part of it because what we found out is that in Ukraine, almost anyone knows how to pilot a drone, and not only
Mm.
pilot it, but understand the tactics that comes with UAV warfare. Now, in the West, unfortunately, situation is different, and ultimately we are also trying to be that bridge between Ukraine and Western allies, where we would export Ukrainian know-how and sort of way of fighting into the West. And this is, as you rightfully mentioned, this is where our service component comes into play, and we're
Yeah.
trying to educate foreign armed forces how to fight modern warfare.
Can you just give me an example then of an innovation that your company has come up with that has come to be used, come to be an important part of Ukraine's fighting capability?
Right. Well, I'll take a step back and uh, do a quick tour into Ukrainian defense tech scene and what we're doing great and what is lacking in the market right now. And by doing that, hopefully I'll answer your question. So, Ukraine has a really vibrant startup scene and lots of brilliant entrepreneurs and engineers developing brilliant products. In terms of product innovation, I think we beat Russia every single time. Like we come up with something new, faster, and better than Russians do. Now, in terms of scaling that innovation and making it affordable and mass produced, unfortunately, we are behind. Probably a lot of people have seen the news on massive Russian Shahid factories that they're building in Russia.
Mm.
Unfortunately, we're still struggling to make deep strike drones massively scalable and match Russian capabilities in that regard.
Why?
So
Yeah. Why is Ukraine so much better at inventing and designing important weapons like drones than Russia is?
I think there are two components to that to that. So first one is Ukraine actually historically Ukrainian Republic when it was a part of Soviet Union. It was a place where most of defense tech companies were located. So those legacy Soviet construction bureaus that were making missiles and rockets that would fly into space, they were actually manufactured in Ukraine. So first of all, we have this huge legacy of talent in Ukraine. And second of all, we're just fighting for survival, right? And that makes a huge difference. When you're fighting for survival, when you're fighting to protect your close ones, you just have to think fast and sort of iterate and come up with new solutions. Otherwise, you're dead. That's it.
Yeah, that is put wonderfully, succinctly. Ivan, do you believe you can win this war?
Um, I know my answer probably doesn't sound very satisfying, but it really depends on what you call winning the war, right? So Russia is so much bigger than Ukraine, and it invaded us with the purpose of completely taking over, erasing our identity, our independent political will, installing their, puppet regime in Kiev, and so on and so forth.
Mm,
So we were able to defend ourselves. And at this point, I think it's pretty clear that it is going to stay this way. So I'm pretty sure we will win in that kind of sense, that Ukraine will remain an independent, Western-oriented country. Now, throughout this war, the evolution of the war winning was such that initially we were happy just to uh, when we defended Kiev and they did not take over. Then at some point we had lots of successes in Kharkiv area, in Kherson area, and we thought we could take back territories like Crimea, Donetsk, Luhansk, etc., etc. So restore 1991 borders. I think at
mm,
this point, at this particular point in time, I mean, over the next couple of years, it is unrealistic. We will not give up on it, and eventually it will be solved, I think, diplomatically over the long
mm,
run. But in terms of defending our democracy, our identity, and
mm.
uh, our country, I think we won already, and it will stay this way.
Right. So the war is a battle for national survival, and you believe you will survive. Just lastly,
Absolutely.
we're waiting for news of America's support for your friends in Europe to support Ukraine, to guarantee Ukrainian security in the longer term, as and when peace ever comes. Do you believe and do you trust President Trump as an ally, America as an important ally and guarantor of security?
I have to. We have to trust our allies because trust works in a way that When you don't trust someone, they don't trust you back. And the only way to overcome it is to give that initial credit of trust to a person that you're dealing with. If we cannot rely on our allies, on our Western neighbors, then I mean, then we're in a very tough spot. So I do trust President Trump. I think ultimately he's trying to do what is best. I understand that, he has other things going on, internal problems, and maybe broader vision on Russia, China, North Korea, the entire sort of world setup. But we have to trust our allies, and hopefully President Trump will come to same conclusion as Ukraine came to first, and then lots of our European allies, and ultimately US will come to the same conclusion that Russia cannot be trusted.
Ivan, good to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you very much. Thank you, John.
Wish you well.